Last year, reporter Bob Ortega and I, we were doing stories in El Salvador about how the violence, the gang violence over there were forcing people up here to the United States. And we were in this one neighborhood in San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador. And we're walking around, being escorted, trying to be as safe as you can, carrying around $20,000 of camera gear. But we're being escorted around, and there was a few neighborhood kids along with us, walking through this one neighborhood that was controlled by MS-13. And if you don't know about MS-13, MS-13 is one of the most vicious and notorious gangs in the world. And as we were walking around, one of the kids was pointing across the street to me at this cinder block building that's kind of unpainted, graffiti all over, bars on the windows, about 5 stories tall. It's pretty typical of San Salvador. And he began to tell me that that's where a bunch of MS-13 members were living. And back of my head, I was thinking, you know what? I think I need to go over there. Small part of my head, okay? Just a really small part. And I said, you know what? I need to show how violent it is over here. I need to find some gang members. I need to knock on some doors and find them, get some pictures. And you probably think that's kind of crazy. You guys are nodding your head. Stay with me here. And so, but have I done this before? Yeah. Believe it or not. I used to get the worst assignments in the worst neighborhoods in Phoenix. And I would go driving around looking for gangbangers. And once I found them, I'd just get out of my car, grab my cameras, and just walk right up to them. But, yeah, big laugh from up there. But this time, I decided, no, I'm going to stay on this side of the street. And to better understand why I made that decision, you have to go back several years to a time when I was walking down this trail, and from behind, this arm grabbed me and pulled me back. And that arm saved my life. It was the summer of 1999. I had just gotten married to my beautiful wife over there, and 6 months prior we had our first child. And Slobodan Milosevic had agreed to terms set forth by the United Nations, and the Serbs had pulled out of Kosovo. And the Albanian refugees who had fled their country were returning back, including Naim Berisha and his family. Now, Naim feared for his life living in Kosovo during the war, and with the help with some aid organizations, he ended up in Phoenix. And reporter Chris Fiskus and I did a bunch of stories on them while they were here during the war. And when the war was over, he was going home, and the Republic was sending Chris and I along with him. Now, we couldn't fly into Kosovo because it was too soon right after the war, and so we took a flight into Macedonia, but once we crossed over the border into Kosovo, it was pretty evident that this country was torn up by the war. Once we crossed the border, there were cars that were left behind from people leaving the country all along the sides. As we got in closer into the capital city of Pristina, you could see that there were buildings that were burned out or bombed out, but also alongside of us, there were cars also returning home, and I remember there were people hanging out the windows, giving the big victory sign at us. And Naim was very, very nervous. He was nervous going home because he heard a bunch of stories about how the Serbs were robbing and pillaging homes and torching them on their way out. And he wasn't even sure that he even had a house to go home to. As we pulled in closer to his neighborhood, we could see that he still had a house there. And as we got out, we walked along the path, making sure that we weren't stepping off anywhere in the garden anywhere because of possible booby traps. And we walked into his house, and you could tell that somebody had been living there. The place was ransacked. All the pictures were torn down off the walls. It was ransacked. But he was one of the lucky ones because he had a house. He took us over around the city and showed us a bunch of the damages that happened around Pristina. And I remember being in the kitchen of this one house, and there were dead maggots all over the floor, and there was a puddle of dried blood, and the blood was splattered along the side of the cabinets on both sides. And this was a house where a man was decapitated. I remember being at another house where a man was killed, and his body was set on fire in the middle of the living room. And what remained was an outline of his body in the hardwood floor. We saw a lot of things similar to this as we went around Pristina, but Naeem wanted to show us this one national park, which was northeast of the city, Jamia Park. And so we drove over there, and when we got out of the parking lot, we walked along this narrow trail that was lined with trees. There were oak and beech trees along the side of it, along with a few pines, and down below there were ferns and wildflowers of red and white and purple. And you could see on this trail that we're walking on, it opened up into this meadow off in the distance. So this is where we're headed towards, and we started walking until about 20 yards ahead of me off to the right. You could see on the tree there was a sign. It was about this big. It was white with plain black lettering. And the words on the sign said, submunitions. It meant there were landmines out there. So I began, what Naeem wanted to show us was that the Serbs had used this area during the war, and so now this whole area is basically useless to the rest of the public. And so I began taking some pictures. I shot my pictures and everything, and for some reason I started continuing on this path. And that's when Naeem's 15-year-old son, Dardan, he grabbed me and he stopped me. And something must have caught his eye, because when I looked down on the ground, we were walking on a bunch of leaves on this trail, and between the leaves, you could see there was a wire going across. I was dead. That was a tripwire. My heart had stopped. It dropped down into my shoes. We carefully backpedaled, trying to retrace our steps, and until I got on asphalt, I was able to exhale. Now, what was I doing? What was I thinking? You know, was I thinking I could get a better picture by moving up a little closer? No, not at all. You know, back then, Dennis could attest that I was pretty reckless and wild shooting pictures, and I would do almost anything to get, you know, the photo. But now, I had a wife at home, I had a family, I had a 6-month-old, you know? Forget about my life. I could have killed the people around me. Now, I learned a lot from that experience, and you know, one of the things that it's taught me is that I don't need to go knocking on doors of gangbangers. I don't need to go looking out for Wedo and his homies and have him pull out his 9mm gun. I don't need that anymore. There are different ways of telling stories, and that's what I've learned. And I can't tell you that I don't do stupid things anymore, because I'm a guy and that's in our DNA. We do stupid things. You know, we throw white socks in with dark laundry and we expect it to come out white. But I can't tell you either that I don't take risks, because in our business, without risk, there are fewer rewards. But what I've learned is that I've learned the difference between taking risks and taking chances. Because you can't be there if they call your name for a posthumous award. Thank you.